Welcome everybody to, this is our third webinar in a who knows how long this series of webinars will be, but I'm so excited to have my colleague and I'm probably her #1 fan and best friends in animal welfare is Makena Yarbrough, who I met or I saw speak at a best friends conference years ago before she was a best friends employee, and I was just blown away by what a presence she had on stage and how what great information she had to share. So I was really excited that Makena could join us because she has wonderful expertise on working with boards, and I know from all of the fundraising mentorship meetings that I have, this is a very common conversation of how can I, work with my board? How can I inspire my board, and lots of board related questions. So without further ado, Makena, I would love to have you kick it off and introduce yourself.
Well, who the heck am I? So just so you know, I'm not a board expert. I've just been around for quite a lot of years. I've been in the field for about 24 years. I started off with an organization with a very strong executive director who did a really great job with her board management and recruitment. So I learned quite a bit from her. I was there for 7 years, and then I went and worked for another organization where I saw a dysfunctional board, and it was able to learn quite a bit about how not to run a board and what problems boards face. And then I became the executive director of the Lynchburg Humane Society. I was there for 9 years, and I took that organization from about a $300,000 budget to over $2 million, and grew a board from, I think we had 5, and they were a working board because I was the first executive director to come in. They didn't know how to even handle me, and was able to build that board up to about 18 members in its largest sense. And then when I left Lynchburg Humane Society to join Best Friends, I was a board member. So I'm coming with a wealth of information. Some of it will work for you, some of it won't. Hopefully you'll walk away with some new ideas. So this is the outline of what we're going to cover today. Like, what is a bad board, solutions to common problems, communications and tools, goal setting, and extra stuff and some insights. So I'm going to jump right in. So I have a series of questions. On Zoom, they have that hand, you can raise your hand. Everyone put their hand up on the icons if you're able to for me, because I'm going to ask a question. And if I ask a question that is a no, then I need you to take your hand down. I think that you all can do that. Yes, perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so ready? First question. Do you have a budget? If you don't have an actual budget, then take your hand down. You'd be surprised how many people take their hand down on this one. Does the executive director get reviewed each year? One's down. Do you have a board self-evaluation process where the board gets evaluated? Are there clear goals or long or short range plans for the organization? Do you have job descriptions for board members and committees? Do you have a formal board orientation process? You do. Oh, good. You went back up. And have you reviewed your bylaws and governing documents in the last 5 years? Great. So this kind of is a gist of what I'm going to be talking about today, truthfully. So common board problems that I did a reach out to our regional team and asked all the different things they hear when they go into shelters from executive directors and or other board members on common board problems. So this is a long list of all the common things: the lack of confidentiality, lack of order, there's a lack of respect, a hostile environment. The secret meetings is my favorite. It's the the meeting after the meeting, or sometimes the meeting before the meeting to prep for the meeting to make sure everyone's going to vote the way that they want to vote. Personal and political agendas, lack of trust, dominating members, non-participants, beliefs in old ways of sheltering. They're just not brought up to the newer ways of looking at the world of sheltering. So I couldn't cover all of it. So I decided to kind of look at two of our biggest problems, and that is the non-engaged, those boards that have members that don't want to be involved, and then the overly engaged, those that want to become the executive director and do your work. So those to me are the two largest problems that we see in animal welfare and other nonprofits. So just to clear, so everyone knows the clear boundaries. So the board's role is to hire and manage the ED. And honestly, the board president in my board was my manager. So she's the one who did my review. She got input from everybody, but like she was my direct line for the most part, except for when we're all together as a board. Financial oversight, ensure adequate resources are available to the shelter team that needs them, establish the mission, vision, and purpose, legal and ethical integrity, organizational planning, outreach participation, assist the ED when asked, and then I put fundraising as a question mark. I usually ask the audience if everyone thinks every single person on the board should fundraise. I'm curious, do you all feel like every single board member should be fundraising? Sarah says yes.
Yes, that's what I
I
said.
would say
Yeah.
no.
No,
I would say
okay.
no.
Notice I'm the
And
fundraiser.
Huh?
I'm the fundraiser. Of course, I'm going to
I know
say,
you're the
I want
fundraiser.
all the help.
Exactly. Now, the board should be fundraising, don't get me wrong. But I had board members on my board that was an HR expert. He didn't fundraise, but he was there and he had a valuable role for me when I had HR issues internally. So he even told me when he came on, he wasn't going to fundraise. But he knew a lot of people in the community. So if he didn't actually raise money by asking people for it, he promoted the organization openly and talked about us and what we did. And so he was a good builder of relationships that later on other people would go and ask the people he knew. So you also can't, some people aren't good at fundraising. So you have to look at them as other resources to the organization as a whole. ED's role, you're to lead the board. And that is an important role that I sometimes have seen EDs not lead. They follow. And I think it's important to make sure it's clear that you are a part of that, leading the board and making sure they're informed. You want to organize and plan the fundraising efforts. Align your team with organizational goals, cultures, and objectives. So as a board, they set the culture, the organization goals and objectives, and the ED's role is to align everybody in the center to those culture objectives and goals. Lead strategic planning, assess and manage the budget. Oversee day-to-day operations, drive communications to the public, and HR, hiring key leadership positions. That is a clear boundaries of what the two roles are. So board structure, this is 101 stuff. You want to have a mixture of stable long-term board members with new board members. Diversity, all types. You want your board to represent the community in which you serve, in my opinion. And I think you would find that as best practices as well. Strategic and operational thinkers. You want a fair, firm chairperson who will listen to everybody, but stand clear on what's expected. You want a balance of skills and experience. So you want people who are well connected to people who have money and are philanthropy, that will give large amounts of, but you also need people like bookkeepers and financial advisors and people who can actually help with some of the jobs. So when I did the research on this, they suggested 8 to 9 board members is a good number, and 11 to 14 is on the higher end. Like I said, I had 18 board members, but I was going through a major change in the organization and also a capital campaign. So we grew the board in order to have as many touch points out in the community as I could have. And then on top of that, we had a capital campaign committee. So it had some board members, but then also a broader reach again in the community. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the board. At times of growth and major change, having a large board isn't always a bad thing. And we had screening processes and board descriptions. So we had job descriptions for the board as a whole, and then we had job descriptions for the committees and the chairs of those committees. And so it was clear exactly what they were supposed to do. So qualities of a good board, you want to have a succession plan, review their performance, and have turnover when needed, and they must know what their responsibilities are. Commit on ongoing learning and development. A lot of times I have seen organizations with boards who have never gone to a conference or never sat in a webinar or know nothing about animal welfare in regards to where we are now. So it's important to have them a part of the learning and development. As you all learn, it's good to share that learning with your board. You want to get the information, get the right information at the board member meeting so they're informed and they don't feel like they have to create their own dialogue on what's happening. I've seen some boards where they don't know what the stats are. They don't know how many animals are coming and going. And that just leads to discord amongst the board and the staff. And it's best to have as much information presented to the boards that they need to know, but don't bog them down with too many details. And I'll talk about that later on. The board should be working together as a team and challenge each other appropriately. I will say that my board that I had was way too agreeable with me. I mean, I have to be honest. And when I received on a few board members that challenged decisions that were being made as a board, then it actually created better dialogue and it created better sharing of new ideas. So don't be afraid of having a board that challenges each other. Engages with others, they're out in the community, they're talking to their friends about what you're doing and the great work that you're doing and is able to communicate your story. That provides strategic rather than operational help. So I see a lot of this where the board is actually wanting to be in operations and they shouldn't be in operations unless they're a working board, which is a completely different board. And that's not what I'm going to be talking much about today. Does not manage, but leads. And I can share this presentation with you all as well. So talk about committees. If you have a large enough board, like we did, we had committees, and it's important that it helps the staff if you have these different committees. So we had an executive committee, which is basically your board officers, and then each of the committee chairs were on the executive committee for our board. We had a finance committee that worked with the ED to develop the budget and then report to the board what the budget was each month and how the financial standings were. Development was around all the things that Sarah loves so much. And that is around fundraising. And so we had a board chair for fundraising that worked with the staff, development director, and the staff ED to work on fundraising. We had an ad hoc committee, which was special events. We did one special event a year. I don't suggest doing a large amount of special events to raise funds. There are better ways because it takes up a lot of manpower, but we did have a special events committee. We had a board governance committee, and that board governance committee was the committee that looked at potential new board members, brainstormed about who we can invite in to join the board. They reviewed board applications, and then they also were the committee that did the review of the board and review of the ED along So they're kind of all things board. Facilities is something that some organizations have where they talk about the problems with the facilities and looking at capital expenditures that might be coming up. I'm not so sure that's all that necessary. And then ad hoc committees are ones like the special events where you create an ad hoc committee so you can bring some potential board members in through a small ad hoc group. So the other thing that I would say that when I first started growing the board, we didn't have an orientation, I'll be honest. It was just trying to get the organization where it needed to be and grow it as fast as possible. And then later on, when we got our new building established and built and we were operating out of it, I did establish an orientation. And I feel very strongly that every organization should have a orientation for the board. We did an overview of the organization, where we started, where we are now, how we got there, who you are as an organization, your beliefs, your goals, your core values. You want to introduce them to key staff members so they know who your team are and start to develop those relationships. So it was me and all my directors when we did these orientations. You want to talk about language. So for instance, there were certain terms or certain phrases that we stayed away from. You don't want to call another organization a kill shelter. You don't want to use the word forever home. At least that was one of our terms. You want to be careful in the language you use to be kind and thoughtful about how we're communicating about other organizations and how we're communicating about the people that are coming into our center and helping us. The other thing I'm hoping it's on here. The other thing about language I'll mention is, do they understand what TNR is? Do they know what managed intake is? Do they know the terms that you all use or we all use on a regular basis, making sure they understand what the definitions are and they understand what it is? Customer service. So one of the least favorite parts of my job as an ED was when I would get a board member calling me saying, Mrs. Jones down the street came to try and adopt a dog today and was told that they couldn't because of X, Y, and Z. And so I'm calling you because I'm frustrated and I need your help. Or such and such is looking for a small poodle that is housebroken and perfect with kids, that is 6 months old. And so it's all the things, right? So I trained the board on how to handle when someone complains to them. You listen, you get the information, and who do they go to with that information? If they're calling because their neighbor has a bunch of feral cats, do you want them calling you? So who do they go to in the organization that you want to direct them to? It may be you. It may be any customer that had a bad customer service in the center, send them to me. If it's about TNR or wanting to bring or surrender an animal, send them to my director of ops. If it's wanting to fundraise for us, send them to our director. So it's just about the how to handle those types of situations. And information on controversial subjects. I'm glad I stuck this in there. That's about the language. So you want them to be informed on adopting black cats out at Halloween. That was a thing in our community. I had to make sure my board understood how to approach that when someone approached them. We stopped feline leukemia and AIDS testing, FIV testing at one point. So I made sure that they understood the why and how to communicate if they got pushback. We went to a completely open to a managed intake. I let them make sure they had all the information that they could have out in the community so they could support the work that we were doing. And then progressive practices. You want to give them the current and new progressive practices are happening in the field. And then the thing as a board member and as a executive director, I always heard was the board doesn't know what's going on, right? Or as a board member, I didn't know what was going on as well. So these are just some tips and tools that you can establish to keep them informed. So obviously you can email the board put them on if you do like emails once a week to your constituents or once a month, and make sure they're on those, right? We did Google Docs. So all of our agendas, all of our minute notes, all of our material for the board was in a Google folder for the board and shared out. We had Slack and team channels. We did Slack, we didn't do Teams, but you can also use those for quick communications to the board as a whole. A board calendar, so they can pull it up and see what's going on electronically. Trello boards is not something we use, but it's something that we use here at Best Friends in order to have a central location for all the hub resources, so they can see what's happening on a Trello board and who's doing what. Make sure they know who they need to go to for certain things, and make sure their responsibility is make it easy for them. So if they're the chair of the budget and the finance, you want to make sure they receive the board's budget in a timely fashion from the person that needs to get that to them, and you want to make it easy for them. Another example is at every board meeting, our development director would hand out cards self-addressed to the person that we were asking board members to thank. And if we got a donation 1,000 and above, we would distribute these cards out to everybody and say, who knows Mrs. Smith over on this street, or who knows Mrs. Nygaard, so that the board would then take those, write a quick note, and we give them right back and send them off. So find ways of making things easy for the board if they're having difficulty getting jobs done. You can ask what can make it easier for you. And the other thing I will say is your meetings are very important, that you're presenting them with full range of information on the operation. So again, they don't have to guess and create their own narrative and make assumptions. So this is just an example of a board, it's our executive report. This was me as a board member receiving this from the executive director. So they did an operations report. They talked about any new staff coming on, if we had any staff leaving us, any accolades, any great things happening on the operational standpoint. In this one, we made sure the board understood where we were receiving animals from, and we did it for the month prior, and how many we brought in. So again, if someone says, oh, they're not helping anybody, Mr. Board Member can say, well, in actuality, we brought in 23 animals from Bedford County Animal Control. So I know that we're doing a lot. So it's just a good communication. The next thing I'll say is make sure your board understands your stats. This is the stats that we got. We did it for year to date, and then we did it by the month. So the board knew what was coming in and what was leaving us and how. And then at the bottom is our spay neuter stats. We had a separate spay neuter clinic. So we communicated how much revenue we brought in, what our total count was for so far, and then how many surgeries and wellness, and basically how many clients we were helping. And then staffing, we did events and fundraisers. We then did save the date, so it was easy for them to reference back on, oh, I remember there's something in July, what's happening in July. We did marketing information, planned giving, grant activity, so they knew exactly who we were applying to grants. So for instance, they knew we were applying to the Greater Lynchburg Community Foundation. If they knew someone who was out in the committee to make those decisions well, or play golf with them or tennis, they can reach out and say, hey, I know we're applying for a grant. I just want you to know, to me, this is a very important organization. So always looking for those touch points. And then at the end, the board would give us talking points. So things to remind them about the organization, so that again, when they're out, they can tell the story of what we're doing. The board is your most valuable community member. They should be tapped into what you're doing. And then financials. So this is financials. I got permission to share it, but it's, all their income. How we did it is not how everybody likes to do it, but this is how we did it. Again, I'm happy to share, but we did the current month, how we were doing in the first 4, Then we looked at how we were doing in May the previous year, so they can see, are we higher or lower? Are we raising more money? Are we spending more money than we did the year before? And that is something I did because I was tired of seeing that we were below budget and not high in revenue. But when you compared it to the previous year, we realized we were doing better than we did the previous year. So I added it in as a reference. And then year to date, and then what the yearly budget is. But everyone should be going over their board financials, their organization's financials. And the last thing I want to say about board meetings is the agenda. Make it clean, make it clear who's doing what. Highlight those action items. If you need to have a vote, make sure that the board knows it so that they can be there if it's an important topic to them, but also they can get a proxy if they need to. Ironically, whenever we had action items, we always had a full board. So I'm just saying that kind of helps get them there too. And then long-range planning. It's important, in my opinion, that every organization has some sort of plan, something that they're working towards. So when I first arrived, our long-range plan was to become a no-kill organization within 5 years. We were to increase our targeted spay neuter resources to community cats and pit bull bully breed dogs. And then the third was to increase our adoptions and return rates. It was very clear, measurable goals. We accomplished all of that within 3 years, truthfully. And then we had to figure out the next long-range plan. So my opinion is that long-range planning is a good thing because you as an organization have clear understanding of where you're headed and what you're trying to accomplish. So you want to have those facilitated. We used a local business person who, and for one of them, we used another nonprofit leader for another one. I've done 3 long-range planning sessions as an executive director and as a board member. And each one was done differently, but in general, I strongly, highly recommend. You can contact your local Rotary Club to see if they have anybody there that will facilitate, like reach out to some of these groups. The goals should be the who, when, and what. Who's doing the goal? When is it to be included? When is it to be accomplished by, and what it is, obviously. You want it to be clearly defined and create change of current status quo. And SWOT analysis are a great way of doing all of this. And you should have the entire board involved. And if you want to pull in key staff members, that's great as well. And we did as well. So you want to build your strategic priorities. So these are some of the ones that Lynchburg just recently went through one, like, I guess 2 years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago. And so this was what our strategic priorities were. We wanted to ensure financial sustainability, expand and consolidate our medical services. We had a spay neuter clinic that was about a half an hour away, and we wanted to bring them on site. And so we were then looking to build a new medical facility next to our current new building. Enhance public experience and brand. So we wanted to have a better brand and awareness and have better public experience when they walked into our building. We wanted to continue and maximize life-saving impact in Lynchburg and around the Lynchburg area, increase our development revenue, recruit, develop, and retain talent, and evaluate board governance. And then this is what one of those looked like. So this was the strategic priority, was enhance LHS public experience and brand. One of the things we realized is that one of the ways that people have a negative feeling around us was because of the number of phone calls we got and how we weren't answering the phone, or they're having to leave a message and they weren't getting the callbacks. So this is one of those objectives was written out of what we wanted to see happen, who's responsible for it. That was the new ED, and then the time frame in which we wanted to see the change. So this is just an example of what a goal and strategic priority sheet looked like. Okay, so you've done everything. Yet you still have a combative, lack of trust, old school, not wanting to embrace new ideas board. Whew, what do you do now? You build a new one. You start looking at your bylaws, you start having communications on how you might get off people who are disruptive and who are not in alignment with where the organization is going and wants to go. Recruiting, when I started with 5 board members, it was literally in a room full of 5 of us saying, who knows who? Like, who knows someone who's connected to someone? And one of the very first board members we ever brought on was a real estate agent. She did high-end homes and knew everybody in the community, obviously, because she was selling and buying their homes with them. We brought her in, and then it just snowballed from there. She was very well connected and helped us to really grow that board. You know, you want to look at having someone in marketing, someone in finance. I love real estate agents. An attorney is always strong, but we didn't have an attorney at first. We had to bring one on later on because they were harder to recruit sometimes. You know, an important person in the community, a CEO of one of your top leading industries, or for us, it was our medical center in town, our hospital system. We brought that person in. So you want to take a look at where you might have some gaps that represent the community and how you might bring some of those people in. And we had a board application. You know, I would go and have lunch with people and talk to them about the organization and where we were headed and get a feel for them. And then I would invite them to be on the board. So build a new one. So final thoughts and insights. And then we will have time for questions because I'm speeding through this so fast. You know, I'm not, like I said, this is the perfect slide. I'm not for everybody. I have a very strong personality and I tend to roll over people, and I wish I hadn't. Sometimes if you are someone who has a strong personality, it's important that you check yourself sometimes and you allow the voices to be heard. Because when I stopped rolling over some of the board members, they became more involved. And I learned that the hard way. And I think it's an important lesson that I like to share with other executive directors, because you aren't always right. Even though I always like to think I am, I'm not always right. And so it's important to listen. The other thing I did wrong, this is my list of what I did wrong, is when I was a board member, which is not wrong. I was a board member as an executive director. So I had voting rights and I was a part of the team. I highly recommend that, but not all boards are going to be open to that. But what I didn't do is I didn't bring the executive team into the board member meetings like I should have. So when it came time for me to leave, and I wanted my director of ops to be the next person that took over my role, but I didn't have any say in that because I wasn't part of the organization anymore. They didn't ever get a real chance to get to know her as a potential leader. So one thing my predecessor did was she started bringing your director of development, director of marketing, and the director of ops to the board meetings to share out that executive board report, make sure this board didn't have any questions on operations, and then they would leave and the board would do the rest of their business. So something to consider. Board review and evaluate. So we did a self-board review every year now since they created it. It was a simple form. We had them fill it out themselves. And what it did was help to hold boards responsible for how much they were participating on the board. And I'm happy to share that. I don't have an example on any of these slides, but it, you know, ask questions like, have you missed more than 3 board meetings in the last year? Do you feel connected to the mission still? And so what it did is it actually helped self-select people off the board because they realized that they weren't really doing all that they could be doing for the organization. You want to make sure that you're managing up to your board. You do need to be a leader, even though I said you don't have to be always the strong personality in the room. You do need to be driving the train and making sure that the board is moving in the right direction. And you should be the most excited, most passionate, most enthusiastic person in the room. You should be so excited about where this organization is going, because that excitement and that enthusiasm feeds down and up to them and to the staff and to your directors and to all of everybody involved. So I always say, be the most excited person in the room and get everybody ready to jump on that bandwagon with you. And these are my 3 dogs. And that's really it. So
That's
I'm happy.
3 of your dogs.
No, my 4th one passed away.
Oh, right.
No, that's okay. I had a
You got a
Burmese
spot
mountain
then.
dog.
You got a spot.
And I have a bearded dragon, or my daughter has a bearded dragon, but I seem to care more about it than anybody in the household.
And she has
But
no cats, which it's wild that we're friends because I'm a loud and proud cat lady.
I foster cats. I'm not allowed. I shouldn't say it like that. But my husband is very allergic to cats. So I try to be respectful of that.
Yeah.
And not walk all over his needs. I've
Well,
been
that's
married for 30
awesome.
years, so you know.
Woohoo! It's working.
Yeah.
Okay, so I asked for questions from folks. So I'm going to run through those questions. And if anybody would prefer me to ask questions and have questions be anonymous, you can email me now and also I'm horrible with technology, so I'm going to read the questions off of my phone. But some of these we definitely touched upon. But if you think there's things that you can add to these questions, McKenna, please go for it. So I'll start with any input for navigating a board experiencing some founder syndrome. And I picked this one first because I worked for a founders organization once. So I want to hear your input, McKenna, on how do you navigate that?
Well, I guess my question is, what is the problem around the founder? Meaning they know more,
Yeah.
are the only
Yes.
knowledgeable people in the room.
Well, it's the founder on the board, not open to change, new,
Yeah.
new team ready to take it to the next level, but having quite a lot of change resistant, if you will.
So, the interesting thing about Lynchburg is that we didn't have term limits.
Mhm.
So we had a lot of long-term board members on there, but thankfully I was the only founder issue. Truthfully, I was the founder issue as the executive director.
Mhm.
But I have seen other boards where they haven't had board limits and they had someone who felt like they had to run the center and had to run the shelter in the organization.
Mhm.
So my suggestion is you begin to build out the educational pieces to make sure they're informed on new progressive things. And it could be that they're talking to other boards of other organizations that are doing progressive work. It could be that you start to have if they're the loudest voice in the room, you need to be louder and you need to find the other board members on the board that agree with you that become loud too. My problem that I've seen in other boards is that the loudest person in the room sometimes is the least progressive person in the room and everyone's afraid to stand up against them. But it's easier to do that in packs of people. So if one person is loud, but they're not seen as to be the experts any longer because the board has been better educated and brought along to new practices, then they do become quiet or they choose to leave. And that's the other thing. You could start to look at term limits, and the board review is another really good opportunity to review the board individually, or like there's so many different ways of dealing with that.
Mhm.
And I hope I gave you some idea there.
Yeah, and so just so everybody knows, I'm going to keep asking questions, and I'll probably ask additional questions that are not on the list. But feel free to raise your hand or just interrupt.
If you're one of the people on the call that I didn't answer it for you, or you have a scenario you want to chat or talk about, I'm open to helping further. Like I said, I'm not a complete expert, but I have seen enough organizations and successful leaders navigate through this water.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times it's that person had to be asked to leave the board. Hate to say it.
And that's what I'm thinking, Makena. I bet there's folks on this call who will need some like comforting guidance on like how do you even introduce, hey, I think term limits need to happen, because that can be very uncomfortable. So I think maybe the timeline and some and not for right now, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if there's folks who would want more support on how do I make that happen.
Term limits was brought into the last retreat we did as a board by an executive director of another he was highly respected individual in the community. And he said, this board needs term limits, or you need to do yearly reviews. And that's how this whole review process came up.
So you had somebody else come and say that.
Yes.
Bingo. Okay.
But I'll also say this, that you're probably wondering, why didn't they have term limits? We had term limits. This is crazy that we took away, because when I went and I had 5 board members and I got 18, what do you think would have happened?
Oh yeah.
Everybody would have left at the same freaking time. I was like, I can't have that. So people left through normal attrition as we developed, or, as we got the building built, we had a slew of people left because they felt like that's what they were there for. Like, some of the people left, but we have core people that were amongst the 5. I have 2 board members that are amongst the 5 that were original, that I would never want to leave the board, because they were on that journey. They knew where we started, and they knew how far along we were and how much we accomplished. Because I've seen a board where they completely turned over and they have a new ED and they're already established, and they had no concept of where that they accomplished.
Yeah.
So there's some give and take there, but it was an outside person that brought it up, which made us all pause and say, maybe we do need board limits. They decided not to, but that might be a way of getting it done too.
Yeah. Just can you guys tell that it's storming out? I didn't have the lights on in my head, and now it's like so dark, but I can't get up now. That's so here's another one. You definitely touched upon this, but thoughts on recruitment strategies for new board members, especially as it relates to bringing in more diversity. So you talked about like, you need the finance, you need the accountant, you need the real estate agent, but maybe how bringing in board members to reflect the community that you're serving.
Correct. Right. So our board governance would get together and we would say, okay, we're looking for someone of an ethnicity background that is a strong leader in the community. And so we would put together a list of people that we would want to reach out to and communicate. And then we would go to the board and say, does anyone know any of these people? And then we would make connections that way. So it's just brainstorming on who's connected in your community that you want to bring in. Our community is, it's a small town. I'm an 80,000 people proper in the city of Lynchburg. Now the whole area is about 250,000. So our community, I have to admit, is a fairly white Christian community. It's probably 60% white, 40% Black or other racial backgrounds. So we brought on an African-American onto the board almost immediately, so that we could better connect with that community. You just have to look at what your community is and try and figure out how you bring all the different diverse backgrounds onto the board.
Yep. Awesome. I like this one.
It's not just race. It's another piece of that, right? Like, it's not just race. It's political backgrounds too. For us, we had all different political backgrounds. We had, we had a gay people, we had straight people, we had it's all the different, and I hope I'm not offending anybody. I'm not always the best at DEIB stuff. So I'm just being honest. We had a wide range of different backgrounds regardless. On race, it was also other things to consider.
Perfect. Oh, here's a good one. This group has a working board that is still learning how to use connections for fundraising. So, how much energy would you, as an executive director, put into recruiting more of a fundraising board versus trying to beg your existing board members to become a fundraising board?
Just recruit.
Okay.
There's a place for everybody. And if you have someone who's trying to operate for you, then you should recruit and look at changing their focus. So it was hard to change the focus of the board originally because they wanted to be all up in my operational business, and I didn't appreciate it. I knew how to run a shelter. I'd run one at that point for like 10 years. So I had to divert them into other focuses in order to get them out of the operations. And that was successful. And really building the board was part of their job that they got excited about and embraced. So I do suggest that you do grow the board, even if it's just a few more members to do that work.
Right. So what about a give-get? I come from the New York City world of board members, and in New York, there's a give-get for every board. And for those who don't know that terminology, it's that every board member is expected to give a certain amount of money or get somebody else to give it. So what do you think about that, Makena, in general?
In general, I think, sure, it's a great practice. There's nothing wrong with that. I will say that every board member should donate something. To what they're able to donate is up to them. But if I'm going out and raising money, especially for a capital campaign, when we did that, everybody had to donate. People would ask, how much does your board donate? How much of your fundraising does your board give you? Because they don't want to give to an organization that the board isn't behind financially as well.
Yep. Here's another one. An existing board doesn't seem overly excited about bringing on new board members. The ED is on the lookout, especially people who will bring diversity to the board. Is there a good way to talk about board recruitment without making the current board feel like they're being replaced?
Could you involve the board in that process? Could you do a governance committee? Have like 3 or 4 of you working on growing the board, and maybe it's not about replacement. And this is a hard one to answer without all the details in some ways, because, are we talking about you have 10 board members and you want to add to it? And do you need to change your bylaws? Or are you looking at 5 people that you're just looking to bring more? And I think it's fair to say that doing a long range plan and having like goals and something to reach for is a good opportunity to start those discussions. Because when they see all the things that they want to accomplish, you can then bring up the idea that you're going to need more bodies in order to accomplish it. And that's how I was able to do some of that and navigate through that. Because when they saw the massive amount that they had to do, they felt like they needed more help to do it.
Yeah. Last question I have on my list now is how best to encourage board engagement around launching a capital campaign, or in general, like a big fundraising goal, when there's already 100% giving participation of the board. So it seems, because this is something another that I'm hearing and working with a lot of groups on, is there's a big goal for expansion in some way, whether it's new building, new staff, new big goals, but then not a sense of how are we going to pay for it? Like how do we pay for it is not always part of the discussion. It's all goals, and it sort of ends there.
So, so we had a capital campaign. So when I first started, that was actually I forgot that one. That was my 4th long range plan, was feasibility on us doing a new building. The building that we were in was a like 6,000 square foot facility that had indoor outdoor runs, no air conditioning at all in the dog areas. We had no isolation area for dogs that were sick. We had very leaky roof, like the building was falling apart.
Mhm.
So the why we needed something was easy enough for us because of the conditions that we were trying to operate in. And we knew that we wanted to become a no-kill organization. And I convinced the board that we couldn't do that in the current building. And in all honesty, I didn't want to be in that building longer than I had to because it was so bad.
Yeah.
So to move from discussion to actual doing, I mean, when a lot of the board members had never been in the building, believe it or not, like they hadn't really toured to have a true understanding of what it was like to work day in and day out in that facility. And so as we were bringing on new board members, one of my requirements is they had to come and tour the board, had to come and tour the building and see what we were doing there and see how bad the conditions were. So, but I will say that the board was not excited about the prospects of a new building and how much it would cost because they themselves didn't see the vision of how we were going to grow the board and grow the support in the community. So the board itself doesn't have to be the ones to raise the money. It's the community that's going to raise the money.
But the
You just,
board is can be an enormous connector to the community. So,
but they aren't they're like, our board wasn't the #1 fundraiser for this. We got a consultant who was willing to work with us for like $150 an hour. It was like nothing. Who helped us build our capital campaign committee. He found our chairperson. Actually, we had two co-chairs. And then he helped us build out who the community members were and help build out what that campaign was. And until we started to build that committee, the board was still not sure.
yeah.
Even though they knew there was a need for it. And then we got, budgeting around what a building would cost and what that looks like. And they still weren't sure. So it took some convincing to say that where we were is unacceptable and didn't represent the community as a whole to how they felt about animals. And as we started to grow, more people getting involved and started getting some donations is when I think the board was on board as we were starting to get donations. Don't get me wrong, we had to do that. We were going to do a feasibility study, and that is something that costs a heck of a lot of money that we didn't have. And I already knew the answer is we didn't have the donors. We didn't have the donors. We had nobody. We had $300,000 budget. I mean, it was not
How much did you raise for your capital campaign?
6.4 million.
Yeah.
And we were told we weren't going to be able to do it. When I met with the campaign chair who ultimately raised that money said to me, there is no way you can raise that money in this community as an organization. The most you're going to be able to raise is 2.5 million. And I went back and cried. Our goal was 4.8.
Wow.
I'm going to let that sink in for a second. So I then went back to him and said, no, let me really talk to you about what our plan is and who's involved. And I really tried to sell it to him, and it worked. And he came on, and I picked the right person who, his wife was a big cat person. He wasn't an animal person, but his wife was, and he loved his wife. And so the two of them co-chaired it with us. He was the CEO of Central Health, which is our big hospital system, and he was looking to retire, and he was looking to do something with his wife. So that worked out for us. And
I'm sure everybody would like their information. Everybody.
I have a whole capital campaign presentation. If you want, I can meet individually or send all that to whoever wants it. Just make sure you get my email. I can send and talk to anybody about a capital campaign and how we did it. Because I was told the local college was trying to build a new facility. The local Rotary Club was trying to build something, and we were nobody.
Yeah.
Because we were nobody.
Yeah.
That board put us into the category of we're everything now. Like the organization here in town is one of the strongest nonprofits because of the board and how they believed in the mission, believed in what we were trying to accomplish, and got us out there and got us to be somebody.
That's
so
awesome.
to this day, I make fun of George Dawson. I tell him every time I see him, yeah, you said we couldn't do it. We did it. So
that's awesome.
yeah.
That's great. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. Those are all of my questions and the questions I received. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask, Makena? You don't have to go on camera. You can just ask. I don't see any. I'm sure everybody's going to be like, yeah, I need to have a meeting. Oh, we have Susan. Susan,
Yes,
ask a
hi.
question.
I'm not going on camera because
No worries.
I'm working at home right now. I am definitely interested in more information about your capital campaign. Congratulations to you. That's fantastic. So I didn't get your email address if you wouldn't mind.
I'm gonna stick it in the chat. Yeah,
Okay.
I just stuck it in the
Appreciate that.
chat.
Very good presentation. Thank you.
Sure, thanks. It's hard to do on Zoom. I gotta be honest. I'm usually in a room and I'm asking questions and people are helping me along, but
Yeah.
anyway, sure.
Anybody who's going to conference this year, Best Friends Conference, if you're like me, I don't even care. I don't even look at the title of what Makena's presentations are. I just go because she's great on Zoom, but in person, she brings such a active audience, and it's a really nice place to listen to questions that people ask and connect with others. And so whatever her topics are, I always go because I'm like, this is the best. But Makena, I can't thank you enough for joining us. Makena has a big role that is always getting bigger at Best Friends because she's so talented, and we're really lucky to have her, helping not just Best Friends, but, willing and excited to help groups across the country. So thank you so much. And yeah, so everybody, this will become a recorded thing. I'll send it out so you can share it with anybody on your team or your boards, because I think this is a great information for anyone. It's very inspiring. So thanks, Makena.
Thank
And,
you.
I'm going to hit stop, and I'll talk to you all on the next time that we have a meeting.
All right, cool.
Bye, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.